Hola, hola a todas, hola a todos quienes nos acompañan en todas nuestras redes de CENTRO. Yo soy Gonzalo Bustamante, soy parte del equipo de comunicaciones y hoy tenemos el gusto y el privilegio de tener nuestra sexta edición de VOR OnLive. VOR en la navegación aérea es un mecanismo que emite señales para que el piloto pueda mantenerse en curso. Y siguiendo esto, en CENTRO, VOR son intervenciones y diálogos que buscan explorar problemas complejos a través de la creatividad. En esta ocasión, siguiendo con una línea de interés en CENTRO y en sus programas, vamos a hablar de tecnología y sustentabilidad en relación con la moda. Y como nuestra sesión será en inglés, voy a presentar a nuestros invitados y a nuestra anfitriona en inglés. Entonces, hi, welcome to our sixth Board on Live. Please join me in welcoming our two guests. First, I'm going to introduce Mónica Mendoza. Mónica Mendoza is the chair of fashion design programs in CENTRO, both our undergraduate degree, but also our graduate degrees, like the Global Fashion Management Master Program in collaboration with FIT and other graduate programs. She has worked with many different brands, and she's an expert in fashion, so it's a pleasure to have her here with us, but also a pleasure to have James Mendolia as well. He is he researched leading textile and apparel manufacturing processes that embrace responsible design. He has developed fashion design and business curriculums for many universities like Parsons and FIT. Right now, he's a professor at Pratt Institute and also the FIT, and is a member of the FIT Sustainability Council. So I'm hoping for a great conversation. Thank you both for being here. Thank you both for having this time with us here at VOR OnLive. And I'll let you to it, but welcome and thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm really glad to be with you.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Hi, James.
Hi.
Well, hi, everyone who is already watching us, and hi as well to the ones who are still joining the conversation. I'm super, super happy today about this talk. I've known James for quite a few years now, and we've become good friends. He's a true New Yorker, so I'm usually there several times per year, and we always see each other, have discussions about topics like this. He always has the best restaurant recommendations as well. So since we're not seeing each other in New York this summer, I'm very, very happy to have him over. As Gonzalo mentioned, sustainability has been a concern, of course, for a long time now. I'm usually thinking to myself, I was a lot in the past thinking on how to tackle topics like this, because as you all know, sustainability is not something you can pack and teach in a single course. This is something that should really go around every single discipline, profession, and function within the fashion system. You know, when I think of the way we're dealing with it within our programs, if you see, I don't know, at the business global fashion management program, you have to look at sustainability from the supply chain and business side. But if you think of the fashion marketing, you have to come up with ways that sustainability are core values of brands and how that translates to their strategy. And when it relates to design and product programs, you really have to deal with materials, also with supply chains and with best practices. So I'm super, super happy to have an expert like James. He has been involved in these subjects for several years now, working with great initiatives all around the world. So he has great expertise. Our wish is that with this conversation, you can go back to your fashion or textile or any other design discipline roles and can come up with ideas or possible solutions as to how to become better in this regard. So without further introduction, thank you again, James, for being here. I'm sure we'll enjoy this conversation a lot, and well, I let you to continue with our.
Thanks so much, and I'm really glad to be able to do this. As you know, I was supposed to be in Mexico City and Oaxaca with my class, so we'll talk about that later. But before I even start, I do want to talk to the audience and just say, you know, one of the things that I realize is that I don't like using the word sustainability so much anymore, but that responsible design needs to go hand in hand with the economics of any brand. So I do understand that that needs to be connected. But overall, my point is that I want to get across today, and hopefully the takeaway is that whether you're in design, merchandising, business of fashion, or consumer, you're really looking at your decision-making process, and you understand the impact of the decisions that you make. So for example, if you're a merchandiser or a designer, I really encourage you to look at your sourcing decisions and how those sourcing decisions that you make while you're in school and then also while you're in industry, how those decisions have an impact on local and global supply chain, everything from the farmers, the farms, workers, animal well-being, all of that. It embraces it all so that it is more than just creating fashion. It really looks at becoming a global citizen, and I hope that doesn't sound corny, but I think, you know, in light of everything going on, it really is important to be able to do that. So
Yes.
having said, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just forgot to mention at the beginning that we'll be answering questions in 2 big sessions. By close to half of our talk, we'll have a Q&A session and a second one by the end. But please feel free to ask everything that you're curious about or that you want us to go deeper in. I have access to all of your questions through our different platforms, so please feel free to ask them. Of course, due to time restrictions, we won't have the opportunity to answer all of them, but I'll try to select the ones that cover the most inquiries from our audience. So thank you again for joining us. Sorry, James.
Thanks for saying that, because the one thing, you know, I want to be able to get across is usually I do these presentations on campus at schools. I'm never sitting down. I almost had to tie myself to the chair to stay in place. So if you do have questions, and Monica, if you want to interject as I'm presenting, by all means, go right ahead. Thank you. So what I did actually this week, you know, you and I have been talking about sort of fashion and how it needs to be integrated across disciplines. And I started thinking about, well, what's going on now? And what's interesting to me is the fact that fashion and science are more connected now than ever before. So looking at fashion, nature, and technology and how they interact with each other. So what I did was tried to break this presentation into 3 segments. And you know, I'm not going to stick to a script, but fashion today, alpaca, which is based on a recent trip that I took to Peru, fell in love with it, and then looking at responsible alternatives to conventional materials. So a little background about myself, just so you know sort of what I'm about and why this is all coming to be. I've worked in the industry for quite a long time. I've worked for Italian luxury brands. I worked for Ralph Lauren, the European licensee, and I also had my own business where I was doing buying and sourcing for Latin American retailers and manufacturers. Most recently, at some point, I got, like many years ago, I really was invited to speak at the school, and I fell in love with it. So in terms of the academics, I've been at Parsons, Pratt, and FIT. And what is even more amazing to me is at all 3 schools, I have written courses related to the topic that we're talking about, but also expanding beyond just looking at, you know, responsible design, how the designers sort of interconnect with trade agreements, with the global infrastructure, all of these different things, which we'll talk about. So I've been around for a long time. I've been in the field. I got into fashion because my passion was traveling, and it is the travel that has connected me to look at other cultures, other locations in the world, and how we interact with them and how we engage with them. So one of the things I always say, a quote from me is, sustainability is no longer a new conversation. We hear about it all the time, and it is hard not to let it go to the back burner. But how do we have this conversation about a new generation of responsible alternatives and manufacturing processes? So that is a new conversation. So in regard to fashion today, again, I'm probably the old man in the room. I've been around for a really long time. And it's been interesting to see, for me, when I first entered the industry, prior to computers, where it was much slower, and you had maybe 4 or 5 seasons in a year where the designer and the merchandiser were able to really nurture their business. So the next slide is going to talk about what has changed. And I pulled up 2 images that I think really reflect what has changed in a big way. If you look at the 2 slides, the one on the left is from 1980. It's an advertisement, and it's an advertisement for jeans using a celebrity at that time. Those jeans in 1980 were retailing for $19.95. Fast forward to 2020, and the ad on the right is from H&M, looking at jeans that would be discounted by 25% and almost being sold at the same price now that they were almost 40 years ago. So the question is, there really aren't any other products that I could think of that are being sold cheaper today than they were 40 years ago. And this really is the root of the problem. And you'll see on the next slide that when we talk about fashion, the latest statistics I could find were from 2014. But what we're talking about is a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. And while you can see from 2000 to 2014, the numbers have tripled, the working conditions and the pay and the inequity, the disparity between rich and poor have grown. So we'll look at that as being part of the systematic problem, especially.
And I think, just adding to your point, that very often people, both working in fashion and outside of the fashion systems, don't very often realize how many industries and sub-industries are related to fashion. This is such a complex industry that we work in. It touches so many aspects, so many industries on the side, that we tend to oversee that fashion workers is not only the people cutting and sewing, or not only the people designing, or not only the people selling at shops. So I think seeing these numbers really helps emphasize that in the complexity of this world.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I remember being invited to speak at a school where they were doing, a number of different art disciplines, and the dean was really reluctant to have me speak because he said, well, we have graphic design, interior design, and all these other disciplines, animation, and I'm not sure that all the students would relate to it. And my answer to him was, very politely, I said, well, if they have all been in a store and bought anything related to clothing, then yes, they are absolutely involved in this process. So it's something that impacts all of us. And really, again, we're surrounded by textiles, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it is interesting for consumers to really be involved in it as well.
Absolutely.
And you'll see on the next 2 slides, so this slide here, the one in the left-hand top I took, and it was an image I took in Italy, and I thought this company was collecting plastic bottles from all around the world, because it looked like miles and miles of plastic bottles. So what we're looking at is this use and abuse of power, of resources. So many of you know that this is going on, so I'm not going to dig too deep, But when I visit the campus, I will go into this in more detail. But it is looking at, as you said, the multitude of other industries, such as transportation and so on and so forth, where it's the other supply chains that get integrated into fashion. And then looking at the use and abuse of renewable energy, renewable resources. You know, this is an industry that I've been in, as I mentioned, a really long time. And when I first entered the industry, these conversations did not exist. And so now that we've made some changes in the United States, you know, I look at slides like this and think, you know, how am I still involved in an industry where it's doing so much damage? And on the right, you're able to see, well, that looks like an incredibly beautiful abstract with gorgeous colors to inspire anybody's collection. I don't think anybody would want to dive into that water. So it's really looking at, you know, what is it that we're doing after we get excited about creating something? And this one in particular, I'd like you all to take notice of, because I'm going to reference it again later. So for those of you in fashion design or fashion business, you know that this is a production marker. And what you're seeing are the left front, the right front, the back, the side, the collars, all the different pieces to the garment. Ultimately, the fabric would be laid out. The marker goes on top. They cut out the cut work with a big, you know, buzzsaw sort of, and the cut work gets bundled and it gets sent into the sewing area to be sewn into garments. So that's used. What I want you to take notice of are the pale blue areas in between the garments. Those pale blue areas are what are known as the cutoffs. That represents anywhere from 5 to 10 and sometimes even higher percentage of fabric that's wasted. What we're not thinking about is what happens to those cutoffs. And in many cases, that gets trashed and ends up in a landfill. So keep that slide in mind as we move through the presentation, and you'll be able to understand why it becomes important.
And I also want to point out, because I had a conversation with someone regarding this topic a few weeks ago, we don't very often pay attention and realize how much waste does industry create. Industrial waste is way bigger than consumer waste due to things like this that many consumers are not very aware of. And unluckily, a lot of designers are also not very aware of things like this.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And, you know, when I've gone to presentations where, you know, you'll have people in front of the room sort of, you know, yelling about sort of the statistics, and they are important, and I'm not making light of it. But what I think becomes for me a way to give back to my industry is to be able to speak to the students and to your point, say, okay, so we know we might have made a mess. Now, what is your role as a designer, as a merchandiser, and how do you integrate into the system and make changes? So thinking about your role as an agent of change becomes super, super important to be able to think about that. And I'm not in no way, shape, or form, this is something Monica and I agree on. I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that creativity needs to be compromised. What I'm saying is creativity, science, and responsibility can go hand in hand, and they don't need to be separate in any way.
And also, we have an awareness today. It's like you can't see something and then unsee it. We have way too much information out there that we can't ignore at creating something. And I think this is even, I would say, even a bigger way to propel creativity. You know, a better way even to challenge people to create things that are transcendent, but also from the business point of view of things, also for decision makers to be more considerate and more caring and more responsible at the ways that fashion companies are working today.
Yeah, you know, I absolutely agree with you. And again, maybe it's my age, but I'm going to say this. to me, it's not very exciting to see another pair of blue pants in the store. But what is exciting is when I am working with young designers and they're working with, we're working with scientists and we're working with guys in technology to really exchange information. And to me, that's a breath of fresh air in fashion.
Absolutely.
I've never seen that before. So to me, to your point, that is something that's really, really something interesting. And to look at, how do we create new business models, new responsible business models that the rest of the world is looking at? Because again, the difference between now and maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, companies are looking to emerging fashion professionals to be those agents of change, which I'll say throughout this presentation, that are going to do something different, that are going to do something exciting and look at new ideas. So what I encourage the audience to do, and this could be an entire topic, which I'm not going to do, is research Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And Ellen MacArthur Foundation is an absolutely fantastic resource that goes across platforms. And at the root of what they do, it talks about circular economy. So what you're seeing there in terms of the image is linear economy, recycling economy, and circular economy. The linear economy is the way the fashion industry worked for many times, meaning we took things and then after we used them, they went we made things, and then after that, it went right into waste, and we never thought about it. At some point in recent history, we started to think, well, maybe some of the parts of this product can be recycled. So it started to move toward a recycling economy. Then you look at the philosophy behind and the teaching behind Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and it looks at circular economy. And with circular economy, what the main goal is designing waste out of the process, meaning designing with every single thing that you could possibly imagine. So an example of that was Timberland, which is a US-based company, maybe 15, 20 years ago. They challenged their design team to not only design new products, but really think about how do you design waste out and how can you make that product have a longer life cycle, a longer lifespan. So example, if you think of the Timberland, the classic boot, one of the things is looking at, taking that boot once the sole wears out, removing the thread that was designed, and then sending it to be repaired, resold, and the sole gets turned into a toy or something else. You can change slides. So now, my love affair with Peru after one trip, right? So why alpaca, why Peru? So I teach this course at FIT that I developed. It's called Fashion Farming. And the reason I developed Fashion Farming in partnership with the chair at that time, Jonathan Kyle Farmer, was he wanted someone that had a business perspective but understood the design process. And the goal of Fashion Farming is exactly as I said, was to take the students to let them understand the impact of their sourcing decisions throughout the supply chain. So that course is a required course. It operates every year. The FIT MFA program launched in 2017. The first group of students I took to Japan to look at the Japanese selvage and the denim supply chain. The second group, I had met a bunch of people from Peru, including people from the Trade Commission and designers. And I wanted to go to Peru to look at alpaca and vicuña. So they're, just looking at the design out of Peru, modern, contemporary, as well as the traditional weaving, so on and so forth. And, El Guapo, the alpaca are immensely responsible. They're noble. They have these cool hairstyles. You have to love them. They're peaceful and sweet. So here are some of the ways that we're going to talk about how the alpaca can be used as an alternative wool compared to either cashmere or sheep. Before I even get into this, I just want to tell you the reason I was brought in by the chair is because he knew I wasn't just going to look at design as being one-dimensional. So one of the things Monica and I was talking about was he challenged me to look at emerging economies, emerging countries that are strong, and look at the existing trade rules and policies that are in place, logistics, infrastructure, everything that a designer, a merchandiser, anybody in fashion business should be doing. So now to Peru. The alpaca, the one thing that makes it much more responsible than the cashmere goat, as you can see, the alpaca they don't have hooves. They have these padded feet, if you will, like soft down the bottom, and it minimizes really the impact on the pasture. So unlike the cashmere goats and the sheep where they have, hard hooves, and they're constantly destroying the land, the alpaca doesn't do that. And then the next benefit of alpaca is that even the way nature has created them, they're gentle to the pasture when they're eating. So because of the way their teeth are naturally formed in their mouth, they're unlike the goats and sheeps, that's the sheeps, unlike the goats and sheeps, they nibble the tops of the plants and don't pull the plant out by the roots. So again, it's much better for the environment around them. And then in terms of chemicals and energy required, because of, you'll see in a second, because there are less chemicals and energy, you're using less water. So we're really talking about water conservation as well. And this was one of the companies that invited us to join them, was a company called Grupo Inca, and they're absolutely fantastic. And I can share their website with Monica in the chat. I encourage you all to look at them. And before I presented this, I wanted to do something. I've always been passionate about Latin America and working with Latin American retailers and designers. But one of the things that I did look at was Mexico also has some interesting trade agreements with Peru. So that's kind of fascinating too. And then the other thing is looking at the dyeing. We know that dyeing in fashion is really bad for the environment. So the alpaca fiber, there's 22 natural colors. And you can see by the color card, they go everywhere from shades of blacks and browns and fawns and these absolutely gorgeous silver grays and whites. And it really is pretty amazing. And that compared to conventional wool, which only has 3 natural colors. So, you're also saving there in terms of the dyeing process.
And I would also, great Q&A for everyone.
So I wanted to do it so I'm not rambling on for hours, but I have to tell you, if you have not been to Peru, it's just absolutely fantastic to sort of look at them as a trading partner, as a collaborator in design. I met so many designers from the states that are now going down there, and Mexico looking at them as well. And then, of course, Vicuña we looked at as well, which I didn't talk about. But Vicuña is the world's most expensive fiber, and it's worth more than its weight in gold. So, I encourage you all to look at these things, because even though they might be unaffordable, they're beyond fantastic. And again, that's where the creativity, the business sense, and the inspiration kicks in.
Yeah, and for everyone listening to us, one of the things that James and I discussed earlier, a few weeks ago when we talked about having this conversation, was the relevance of talking about examples within Latin America, because very often I have the sense that people people involved with the textile and fashion industry in Mexico tend to get disappointed about hearing that a lot of innovations are happening in Japan or in Europe or in the US. And I think it's very nice to see examples of great practices going on in countries that are very similar to ours in many ways. So, James, we have a few questions here.
Sure.
Daniel Vilela, who is actually an alum from CENTRO, says he's been working for about 6 years in a textile project that involves artisanal processes in Oaxaca, but it is very sad that in Mexico there is no good quality in the weaving process. Well, I don't know if this is weaving or at the spinning process, but is there something from your experience that you've seen as a good practice in this regard?
Yeah. So one of the things, again, to point to, and again, being American, we're so used to, and being from New York, I'm used to being all over the place. I love when you have cotton from Mexico sent somewhere to be spun, sent somewhere else to be woven into fabric, then be turned into a garment. So, I'm looking at all of this, and the thing that the students, their takeaway has been in terms of design as a designer is that this is the time to start cooperations and collaborations and really be open and speak to spinners and weavers in other places and say, what if we were able, how would we be able to do this? And don't take no for an answer. So in terms of the weaving process, I think you do have good. Why does he, I mean, you can't ask him back, but why are we thinking we don't have?
I think, I'm not sure if he's referring to the spinning process, probably, and I would like to add something to that. A lot of the spinning process really relates to the quality of the fiber from the origin. It's very difficult that you can transform a poor quality fiber into a good quality yarn. And I think in this regard, what James is saying also becomes very relevant. Sometimes this cooperation or looking across disciplines means that you need to source something from outside where you are.
It could be, and again, we were supposed to be in Mexico. I haven't been there in a while, but it could be twofold. So, it could be fiber related, or it could simply be the fibers are there, but the textile mills, somebody needs to make an investment to get machinery that's from somewhere else that can achieve that. It's, just real quickly, if you think about the fashion industry, in the United States, it was the root of our industrial revolution. And it was about, the British when they came over and came over with all these things. So it could be that, maybe Danielle was his name.
Yeah, he's actually adding to his answer. He says there is no good quality in wool, but I would have to say, for example, this is the reason that cashmere is so expensive. Because already the fiber from the origin is incredibly good quality. But I think this is something that it's fixable. You can find a lot of wool projects across the globe, which are good practices and are small scale projects as well.
Yeah. And it goes into, looking at, again, sort of maybe you shift away from conventional wool, what's not that great for the environment anyhow, and looking at other alternatives like alpaca. I mean, alpaca to me, I came home with like socks and blankets, and it's fantastic. And the other thing too, which I'm seeing, which I love, was what the spinners and the weavers are doing, or working together, and they're taking the fibers that don't get spun into yarn because they're too short, and they're using them for home interior to make down comforters. So they're not using down, and they're using alpaca fiber. And again, it's looking at that sort of new business model and creating something that's new.
Yeah, we have this a double question.
Yeah.
We have some concerns regarding consumers. Do you want to touch on that right now, or I save those questions for the end of the presentation? Really up to you.
No, we can. Is this the one from LinkedIn?
Yes, it's Ana Cecilia who is saying, what can we do as consumers to help prevent the waste pollution mess? I'm a graphic designer working also in industrial design. There is no culture in Mexico to prevent this. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, so there wasn't a culture in the United States that did this, 15 years ago. It's an evolution. It's a sad and sorry evolution. But, the goal, so I'll speak twofold. The goal as a consumer is to think about what you're buying. So I'm going to give you a question to think about the next time you go into the store. When you buy something, is think about, what is your garment going to be doing 20 years from today? Is it, and it might mean that to start, if you don't have enough brands in Mexico that are focusing on responsible design, it might be your protest is to get that clothing from elsewhere. So it's really looking at everything in your home. And again, I'm guilty of this as well. When do you make a shift? I mean, now even for home, what I try and do, I don't know if you can see, now everybody's in my office, but I tried buying chairs that didn't go into a landfill and had them reupholstered. So it's also, as a consumer, rethinking every single thing you do. Is it hard? Yes. Is it a big pain in the ass? Yes. Sorry about that. But it absolutely, listen, it's still G-rated. So it absolutely is a mess. I've been in Mexico. I've been in, parts of the United States. I get it. And then you mentioned, as a graphic designer, there's no culture.
I think this is this is complementing her profile. But
okay.
I wanted to add something to that, because I saw someone mentioning in the comments that it seems like the sensation is to consider luxury products, and I would invite everyone to rethink, as consumers, your shopping habits. Because when you think about it, if you add up all the money you spend in cheap clothing each year, it really adds up to a lot of money. So let's say if you buy 10, $15 sweaters in a year or in a season, that's already $150. And I can assure you all that with $150, you can get yourself one good quality garment that will stay with you for way longer.
Right. And I'm going to add to that, because I am completely aware that $150 might push someone over the bank account. But having said that, again, I'm much older, and I hate to keep saying that, but I am. But, there was a time where I worked part-time job, and I saved my paycheck every week. And then I bought my Friday night shirt. And that was a Friday night shirt that I bought for a long time. If you think, that I wore for a long time. So it's up to you. I don't have any magic answers that are going to say, keep doing what you're doing and we'll make it better. It can't. It's a joint effort of really, as a consumer, shifting your focus. So we're seeing it even with celebrities, where they're wearing the same gowns to different events. So it's really looking at, that, your thinking habits.
James, Valerie is asking, what's your opinion on recycled fabrics using PET bottles or recycled cotton, on the other hand?
So two things. The next part of the presentation, Valerie is going to be thrilled, because I'm going to be talking about recycle. The first thing is, in a country like the United States, these bottles shouldn't exist. Our water is perfectly fine. And, we're 329 million people that are drinking 5 bottles of water a day, which is ridiculous. So I think it's important, which you'll see in a few seconds, Valerie, it's important that, you know, as a designer, you know where those bottles are coming from, and you know how they're turned into fabric. Because what you're going to see is a product actually, that uses a mechanical process to convert the plastic bottles into ultimately into fabric, and then ultimately into garments. So you'll see that in a second. But to turn junk into junk, it's again, it's a problem. And we're going to see all of that, because I'm going to show you eco cotton, which looks at taking those offcuts from the production room and really looks at spinning them into new yarn and new products. So it's designing waste out. It moves towards a circular economy.
And maybe one last question before we move to the second half of our presentation. Rebecca, she's asking, I just read that regenerative agriculture can change fashion industry. There are some brands working in India. What are your thoughts?
Again, it's super complicated. I'm not going to have any answers, but it's up to, there are plenty of brands, and again, if some of these are students, I could send you links to articles that highlight designers that are working with brands in India. I actually have one on my desktop, but I'm not going to fumble with it. And it's about embellishment. We know that the Indians do amazing embellishment. They do it for Versace and Dior and every designer on down. And some of those embellishments are done, handwork is done in the worst of conditions. And within the same New York Times article, you have people that are working to create programs to create a cultural shift. I think we're all aware that once you break the cycle of poverty, once you create a change in the way we do things, regardless of how hard it is, that's when you become the agent to change. Just my personal opinion, you want to change, you don't want to just pull things out, because again, like in the United States, like in other parts of the world, the textile and apparel manufacturing is a dark part of our history, between slavery, child slavery, and everything else. It's a matter of reforms and reconfiguring the way they're done.
Absolutely. We will continue with the second part of our presentation. Carefully reading your questions so that we can go back to them in our second Q&A by the end of the slideshow.
Good deal. So now what I put together is this section sort of stems from a company that I was working with in Italy, and it's looking at responsible alternatives with sustainable credentials. So I'm going to go through all of these, and then I'll talk a little bit about that particular company as well. So the first thing I want to is really sort of convey is that you need to be curious. Those of you that are fashion designers, you do not need to just look at what's being done at the mill level. You need to be looking at what's being developed in terms of fiber development. So you should be monitoring the fiber companies like a hawk. And again, the reason I got involved with looking at these materials is when I would travel to the trade shows in Paris for whatever company I was working for or whatever I was doing, I started to see fabrics that were made from milk and fabrics that were made from corn and all of these different things. I collected them because I was curious, and then I monitored those fiber companies and that fiber development. So you need to shift that way of thinking. So, you're going to find it more interesting as well. And I'll share some other links in terms of resources that are important. So the first product that I'm going to talk about is a product out of Italy called Reverso. And I know the students were saying things are out of Italy, things are out of Japan. We're going to see some things out of Portugal. But the reason, in my opinion, things are out of Italy and out of Japan is, keep in mind, the Italians have to invest, and the Japanese and the Portuguese have to invest a great deal of money into their business in terms of research and development. because everything that they're currently doing, designers and brands can get that in Asia and Southeast Asia. So the important thing is to maintain that research and development. So this first product is called Reverso. The jacket, the coat that you're seeing there is by Gucci. It was used by Gucci. We had the Gucci jacket and everything else, but it's being used by other companies as well. So go to the next slide and you'll see that. Do you remember that marker that I showed you, Monica, and I showed everybody, right? Those offcuts, what you're looking there are the guys taking the offcuts from the production table. They sort them by color. Those are pre-dyed, pre-consumer. And now what they're going to do is engineer them into something else. And that something else is shredding go back to the, I need to go back 1 second. Thanks. The something else is taking those offcuts, shredding them into fiber, then spinning them into new yarns. And this particular product is either cashmere or wool yarns. So if you think about cashmere, most of it is in grays and blacks. So it can be done over and over again. What I want the audience to look at is in terms of the sustainable credentials, look at the reduction for using this product. Look at the reduction in energy, over 76%, the reduction in water usage, 89%, and in emissions, 96%. This is fully traceable, and in above and beyond that, it's also certified. It holds an LCA, which is a life cycle assessment by a third-party company. So it's not just the mill saying this is what we do and just take our word for it. So it's all verified. You can go to the next slide. They do woven and knit fabric. So again, really, really beautiful. Yarns for contract apparel and also knitwear. So, we always get people looking at knitwear. There's another product which is not in the slide presentation because I was trying to contain it to an hour, and it's called Ecotech. And Ecotech has a similar concept, but Ecotech uses pre-dyed, pre-consumer cotton cutoffs from the production rooms, which means that they have a full color range when they create the yarns because they're already dyed. So it's already, it's waiting there, and their minimums are quite low. This particular product, this is a pioneering product. It's by a Japanese company called Asai Kasei. They're based in Japan, as I said, and it's a part of a EcoSmart family. It's called Roika. This is actually the world's first responsibly made premium stretch. And as you all know, or might not know, stretch fabrics are notorious for being horrible to the environment. But this particular one is Cradle to Cradle Gold certified, and it breaks down without releasing any harmful substances. So getting back to Valerie's question, it is a long process. I'm sure we're going to be seeing changes long after, I break down in my,
James,
final resting place. Go ahead.
I want to interrupt you for a second, but because I think cradle to cradle is a concept that is familiar to us people who are involved with this. But if we could spend 3 seconds explaining what the concept of cradle to cradle is.
Sure. So again, the Cradle to Cradle, I forgot what year it was started, but the goal is it's a nonprofit organization, and really they look at the sustainable business strategies so that it's regenerative in its cycle. It's not about waste. It's not about disposal. It's looking at sort of nature, all of that. Keep in mind, they're looking at the entire supply chain. Their main goal is to transform the way we make things, and they're a service. I could share those links with you as well for your students so that you could see, sort of the evolution of that particular bits and pieces. And then people that are tied to that, those of you, do a Google search. Louis Perkins, he's been one of the pioneers. He's since moved on, but there's, you know, it's an amazing organization that has been fighting the battle for quite a long time and looking at a product throughout the supply chain and how to make changes in that.
Thank you, James.
Sure. What's next? So remember all those plastic bottles? I don't even know how these images, okay. So remember all the plastic bottles? What's interesting is this particular product is called New Life, and it's a high-tech conversion model. So back to, I think it was Valerie or Virginia's question. If you notice now, I haven't mentioned the word sustainable. I'm talking about responsible design. I haven't used upcycle. I haven't used, you know, the word recycle. These words that I'm talking about conversion models, transformation, you know, I'm from a business perspective and from a design perspective, you need to look at the way you communicate these products to your client, so that, or to your ultimate customer, so that they understand this isn't their grandmother's recycle. So this is the product that I was talking about, where they use a high-tech conversion model that really transforms post-consumer bottles. All of those bottles are within an 80-mile radius of the facility. But the thing that's absolutely fantastic is they use a mechanical process to break down the bottles, not a chemical process. It's made completely in Italy, and it's, you know, the images that you have there are by Max Mara. It's significant reductions in water, energy, and carbon dioxide emissions. Take a look at that first one in terms of, you know, water consumption, a 94% reduction. So think about the fashion food chain and how we constantly, again, move to different countries because of globalization, because of strengthening other countries' economies, because of new trade rules. At some point, we're all going to be shifting from China because it's going to get too expensive, and China is going to be producing luxury products. And we're going to be moving to continents like Africa or other countries in Southeast Asia. So if you think about water as being a precious resource in certain countries, you know, these are things that can happen as we move forward to really responsible, future responsible fashion systems. And I mentioned CLASS, which is an acronym for Creativity, Lifestyle, and Sustainable Synergy. I partnered with them a few years ago. It was founded in 2010 by a woman by the name of Juicy Bitoni. Super, super smart, way ahead of her time. What she wanted to do was create a platform, an international platform that connected designers, merchandisers, production, sourcing agents, you know, together. And, you know, I love Juicy. She's such a great woman, super smart, really nice. And, you know, her and I met because we were working toward the same cause. I was working with design students, working with a product called Ingeo, which was a corn-based derivative. And she was the one that was involved in marketing, and then opened her own business. And the reason I mention is because we partnered together a while ago to be able to create a kit that would allow the schools to universities to use it as a resource, as a tool, so that it's a jumping off point for students to be able to see, you know, what it is that happens. And so what should be on your radar? One of my favorite places is Tintex Textiles. I think that's next. Yeah, Tintex. So here's a company that, again, when you think of innovation, sometimes we think of Spain and Italy and France. Well, Tintex is based in Portugal, in the Porto region. They are beyond fantastic. They've been pioneering things long before everybody else. They're part of the circular economy movement, and they were one of the pioneers to look at not only doing things responsibly, but how do we look at water conservation with the washing of textiles and the finishing, and eliminating aggressive treatments and still optimizing clean surfaces. So they've done that. They're part of Ellen MacArthur's initiative, and you'll see, I encourage you all to look at them and follow them like a hawk. they're just moving full speed ahead like nobody's business. So they're also winning awards, and I brought this up because they also do these kind of interesting coatings made from pre-consumer cork, and it's part of the circular economy, doing textured things such as jersey and using BCI cotton, which is Better Cotton Initiative, which looks at the entire cotton supply chain. And then I think the next slide is going to two of my favorite things that they do. So they've also looked at their entire cotton supply chain, but two of my favorite things that come out of a Tintex. And again, the next time I'm in Mexico City, I will make sure I bring my suitcase and you guys can see them, feel them, touch them, hug them, and look at all the fabrics. But C-Cell, which is fabrics that take the positive properties of seaweed, and those properties of seaweed are permanently preserved within the fiber. So again, this goes back to my point about being curious. Right now, you all should be looking at ocean fibers and ocean fiber developments. Much more interesting than looking at somebody's blue pants on a runway. And then the last, I think it's the last one, but the last one that I have on there is Smart Cell. The Smart Cell looks at sort of creating fibers that have trace elements of zinc. And for those of you that might not know, zinc has been used for anti-inflammatory capabilities. So think about how that can be used, across fashion into other areas. And before we go on to the Q&A, I'm going to ask, I met these people in a webinar, which was kind of interesting. And it's a company called HiQ, and we could share that with you. But HiQ researches putting elements of metals into fibers, into fabrics. And as we all know with viruses, metals are the greatest way to protect us from them. So they've been doing some amazing things that are beyond super fantastic. So your takeaway should be activate change, be curious, look at things that are outside of fashion, and really do things that are interesting, that the school brings forth to you. And for those of you that want to follow, on the last slide, you'll see my Instagram account. I don't post anything personal. It's always things that are related to responsible design, whether it's students working that way, new company developments. So, I encourage you. I thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, James. I'll pick some of the earlier questions.
Sure.
I promise everyone we're not ignoring you, but we're getting a lot of questions. So we'll try to answer the biggest amount that we possibly can. Somebody's saying that with the pandemic, they are facing a lot of sourcing troubles. And what could he comment regarding that? And he or she is also asking about traceability. Any thoughts on that?
So two things. So in terms of sourcing, here's where, again, if you're, again, I'm a firm believer, if you're not fine, even though you may want to do things in your home realm, you might not be able to do 100% of it. So here's where you can look beyond your borders. And Juicy also started an e-commerce site, which allows designers, emerging designers, students to buy anywhere from 1 to 5 meters, fixed, I think it's 50 meters maximum. And you're able to do that. So it's looking at who wants to work with you. If they don't want to work with you, then you go elsewhere. So in terms of sourcing, it's looking for those things that are out there. The other thing is, Juicy is also one of the organizers of the smart creation at PV. So for some of you that are talking Premiervision, so for some of you that are talking about sourcing, I encourage you to go onto the PV website, the Paris website, and then look at the exhibitor list under smart creation. And you'll see that there's a nice chunk of exhibitors that host fabrics from all over the,
I was going to say that, because trade shows, I mean, particularly PV in New York is one of those places where you and I always meet every year. And I think there's an increasing, well, let's see how trade shows will evolve due to this situation. But I see every year more and more vendors willing to do low minimum type of selling, because that has obviously been a big challenge for industry. Not everyone is ready for 1,000 yards of a single color fabric, but every time more and more, I see a lot of companies working with low minimum.
Completely agree. And for the most part, the European and the Japanese mills will actually do that. And the Portuguese mill that I mentioned before, they absolutely will do that. And many of the mills, just in general, that might have been snobbish to not answer a call or an email from a student or emerging designer. I had a speaker talk to my class on Monday, and his new business strategy is to monitor the schools and monitor emerging designers, because they're loosening their policies so that, yes, they will work with you now and do 25 yards for your production in hope that in a year or two, that 25 yards is going to turn into a bigger order for them. And they are looking to nurture. And that's something that we haven't seen in a while.
And listen, I always say this to my students: don't be shy and ask the questions, because if you don't ask, the answer will be no automatically. But you'd be surprised of the amount of times that people say yes. And I'm telling you about direct experiences that I've had with students of us that have asked massive, super professional mills around the globe if they can sell them a few yards of fabric. And I don't think there's been too many that say no. So you always have to ask. You always have to, find the right way to present your projects so that they feel relevant to someone that you're trying to buy from.
Yeah, and Monica, maybe I should have had in that slide, be curious and be a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Because that means that you might have to ask 25 mills, and all you need is one to say yes.
And this is very important. Things are not easy.
Yeah.
They're never easy, but they're not impossible. And I think this is also the reason that we see some companies succeed and some other companies not succeed, because, working in fashion is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And you have to be a pain in the ass, like James is saying.
Yeah.
I want to... wait, I lost my question. Okay, so Alejandro is asking about international trade agreements. We were talking about this earlier on, outside of the conversation. And I think this is very often something that is overseen by medium-sized or smaller companies. So maybe a few thoughts regarding international trade agreements, which are incredibly important for this industry.
So, you mentioned international trade agreements. I'm going to start with Peru. The reason I, really wanted to take the MFA graduate students to Peru after I was working with some of the Peruvian mills and so on and so forth was what I found out was the U.S. has trade agreements with Peru that not only encourage sort of this trade back and forth in terms of fashion, but the other thing that I found fascinating was the Peruvian government worked with the U.S. government at a time when you could, that worked with the U.S. government so that trade rule actually incorporates environmental issues, workers' rights, and all of these other things. So to me, it made it even more fascinating to be able to go to a country that looked beyond. And the other thing with the trade agreement with Peru is they also have other agreements within their own country that allows them to do things with the UK. And like I said, I didn't read through the entire thing, but I know you all have one from 2018 that was revised between Mexico and Peru. So it was just beautiful to see how they work doing social entrepreneurship, and really are looking to at all levels, you know?
Absolutely. Wait, where was it? I can't find the question now, but someone was asking about the marketing side of this. I would like, if you don't mind, to start with a few thoughts, and then you can help me finish that answer. I think from the marketing point of view, there are some important aspects to consider, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the conversation. I think what marketing can help do is really establish that set of values within brands and responsible values within brands, and then help create strategies that are aligned with those values. I think in marketing, we have to be careful, because I'm sure this is a buzzword and you've heard it a million of times. With marketing, you have to be careful not to greenwash whatever project you are trying to market. And for those of you who are not familiar, this term relates to the fact of creating communication or marketing strategies that make appear companies as more responsible or more sustainable than they actually are. But I think if you go back to the true purpose of marketing, it can really help establish value within brands.
It can reinforce. So I want to expand on that. The first thing I want to say is, you know, even though I have business background, mine's in merchandising, but in terms of marketing, I'm always suspicious when brands start to push that in you know, the sustainability word right at you. And what I always tell my students, what I tell people that I work with, is the word that comes to mind is, if you're being responsible, it needs to be authentic to your brand, because the customers, the people around you, the people that work for you are going to be able to sense within a second and a half if you're not being true to your DNA. So it needs to be authentic, and I don't think it should be used to promote. And I'll give you an example at 3 different levels, maybe 2. If you think of Stella McCartney, up until recently, nowhere in Stella McCartney's ethos is about pushing the word sustainability. It's all about creating beautiful designs. The same with Eileen Fisher. We recognize both Stella McCartney brand and Eileen Fisher as being responsible, but they know it's an evolution. They know it's a journey. I mentioned to you before we even get started, the reason I love Eileen Fisher is, you know, it was Vision 2020. And when they achieved that, they didn't look back and think, we're done. Now they're looking at what's our next Vision 2030. So it's always changing based on what's going on. And in terms of marketing, I think it's a slippery slope. You have to be super careful, as you said, Monica, that you're not using it as a ploy to convey something that doesn't really exist and it's not authentic.
I was going to say that. I mean, when I'm talking about creating values, I think that really is not about a buzzword. It's about really creating meaningful value. And I think regarding marketing and communications, they also have to support transparency. I think consumers are really changing. As you mentioned before, you'll figure out in about 25 seconds if a fashion company is lying or not. And I think being transparent to consumers and being truthful is probably one of the most important roles of marketing and communications in fashion.
Yeah, and it needs to be clear. You know, if we look at that Gucci slide, there was a big old hang tag. You know, originally Juicy said, you know, there's too much on there, and they were like, marketing needs to be clear and to the point. You go to buy a coat, you don't want to read a book to buy that coat. So it needs to be clear and precise. But
Absolutely.
who the hell is going to argue with Gucci? So you want that on there? Go right ahead.
Yeah. Let me see. Okay, I think this is an important question. Vivian is saying, we have a few minutes left. Vivian is saying that she's been working with artisans for years now, and it's very difficult to enter the chain that everyone wants to be in. But at the same time, we all want to profit, and at the end of the day, the product becomes ridiculously expensive. So any thoughts on that?
So a few things. So the first thing is, when you're talking about working with artisans, I think, especially international markets, needs to be a collaboration where the products are modernized. That was one of the things that I saw in Peru, and even with your friend that you connected me to, is that it's a collaboration between the designer and the artisan, so that it comes up as being something new, something modern, that the customer doesn't look at and think this is this artisan thing. In terms of the price, it's going to be, you can't compete with, I'm going to be brutally honest, we can't compete with low-cost imports from certain parts of the world. You all know what I'm talking about. That's just the fact of the matter. So you have
and I think also in this regard is when design and product development becomes incredibly important. I mean, I've been saying this like 1,000 times for the past maybe 10 years. When you're trying to support responsible initiatives and brands, design plays a key role, because as James is saying, you can't compete with fast fashion. You can't compete with inexpensive products. So your customers have to find true value in whatever you're offering. But the only value can't be artisanally made. There has to be something else.
Yeah.
Because, you have to understand that responsible design doesn't equal charitable design.
Agreed, 100%.
People have to see value. And I think when people see value, they're willing to spend their money on your brands. And I would also like to add something, because I have quite a lot of experience working with artisans in Mexico. I think you really have to first be willing to commit long-term. Artisan projects work slowly. You need to be willing to commit long-term. You won't see results in 6 months, because you're talking about people. This is creating a community between creatives and artisans. And it's not like when you're working with a factory, for example. So first that. Secondly, I would suggest to pick your battles. If you want to be 100% artisanal, products become crazy expensive. And what I often see is that some people want for the yarn to be hand spun and hand woven and hand embroidered and massive size, and everything adds up to the cost of those products. So I think this is the reason that sourcing decisions are very, very important, even when you work at an artisanal level. Sourcing is not exclusively related to massive productions.
And one of the designers that I met in Peru, she has I had her images on the slide at the beginning, and that was one of the things she talked about, is that you cannot do 100% of anything, because we're ultimately in fashion to make some kind of money. So you need the agility to be able to create and move along forward and move along at a pace where you're not trying to sell something out of season. And then the other thing too was, what she was saying is it like exactly echoed what you just spoke of. It was a long-term investment in time to work with these communities where, you'd have to go every day to make sure that, they have the support that they needed. The one thing I wanted to mention, Monica, if it's okay, was one of the questions that we were talking about that I get all the time is students and designers say, this seems overwhelming. And I always tell them, yeah, it is overwhelming. When I first started, I wasn't doing any of this. But what I would tell designers, emerging designers and fashion students is look at what you do and choose one area of what you do and make it better. Others might disagree with me, but I say make a 1 to 3 year plan, a 3 to 5 year plan, a 5 to 7 year plan, so that you're taking steps that help. Because the reality is this isn't going to happen overnight. I mean, this industry has been around for thousands of years. So we need to, you need to be able to do what's true to you. So if you're doing children's wear, you might start with certain things like chemical reduction, but it might mean to start you're using more water. The whole thing is always, it's the designers and the merchandisers that are kicking butts at the mills and making them have the technology to catch up with the designers and merchandisers. So you're the one that ultimately is going to have the demand, and it might not be as quick as you would like it to be, but I've seen change. Is it what I think it should be? No. Is it going to happen in my lifetime? No. In yours, absolutely. So I think it's all of that kind of combined together.
No, and also I would say, adding to your answer from the business point of view, as you mentioned before, you have to make it easy for consumers, because I think that's one of the key and one of the most pressing issues within this conversation. Consumers also need to be re-educated, and you as a brand or as a fashion company you need really to truly support that process at re-educating. So communication plays a key role, branding plays a key role, marketing plays a key role, because as I said at the beginning, this is a multi-factor issue that needs to be tackled from every single aspect of the fashion supply chain.
And don't be afraid to ask questions, because I still do. I don't know everything. I think that's what it is. Figure out who your community is, who your posse is of people that have like-minded thinking. And I think that's why you and I have gotten along when you come here, is because there's a similarity in the way we think. Nobody thinks exactly the same, but there's a similarity. No pun intended, there's a common thread. And that's what will keep you connected to that group of people for decades.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're running out of time. And
you want to ask me about my book?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you, because I think this is always very useful for both our students and external audience who is listening to us. Any recommendations you could suggest to everyone? This could be books, movies, media outlets.
Sure. So for those of you interested as a resource, there's a magazine online, or you can get print. It's called Eco Textile News. Eco Textile News, that's done with the sustainability bit. In terms of what I look at, I just ordered it. I love. I don't look at anything fashion. Chef Jose Andres. I don't know if you know who he is. Mm-hmm. He's super interesting. He just wrote a book called We Fed an Island. He was a chef. He's from Asturias, Spain. He's now Spanish American. He lives in, I think, Washington, D.C. And when everybody was, after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, kept saying nobody was doing anything, he just said, F it, I'm doing it. And it's a true story of him rebuilding Puerto Rico by simply starting with the most basic thing, which was feeding people. So I watch him, the book, I can't wait to get it. I started reading it online. And then the other thing is I follow him on Instagram, and now what he's been doing is there's a shift. So it's a shift, and it's him doing cooking segments with Kamala Harris and Anthony Fauci, and all of these interesting people. So to those of you that say you're passionate about design, my takeaway is if you're passionate about fashion design, look beyond fashion, because that's just makes you one-dimensional. So all of these other things are what's going to make you happy and interesting.
Thank you, James. And I would like to add up a couple of recommendations. I was going to mention the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because also as a resource, I think what they've done has been incredibly important. So if you don't know them, do make sure that you check out their work. Also, I would say at a consumer maybe level, I read a long time ago this book called To Die For. It's relatively easy to understand, and it tackles a lot of subjects from farming to consumption. So we'll send you those recommendations as well. And if you want to go deeper, I really recommend the work that Dr. Linda Greer has done throughout the years. She's more on the academic side of the conversation, but I think for people who are really involved in the business, you have to go deep. Your curiosity has to go deep. So those would be my advices in terms of materials to consult.
Good deal. And it's incredibly interesting. Like I said, now I've been looking, just sort of searching around for ocean fibers, meaning trying to create fibers that mirror that of an octopus that changes its camouflage and all of that. So it needs to be bigger. Some of the best designers in the world they don't just design, they're multidimensional.
And also do make sure to have a look at the intersections between art and science, because that's, I think, something that will quickly or relatively quickly permeate in the fashion world. There are so many developments in the art world in regards of intersections with science that are ultimately translating to materials. And I think this will have an impact, hopefully soon, if not eventually, on the way we think of material production in fashion.
Yeah, and ultimately, closing comments it's all about you. You're the next generation to create responsible future fashion systems. I mean, we're waiting to see the great things that you all will do. There's a lot upon us now, and it's a lot, but you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Doing this was so much fun. I think it's a that's an understatement, an incredibly relevant conversation that we have to continue to have and develop. As you said, this is not a one conversation thing, it's a work in progress. And this is the reason at the beginning I mentioned, this is really not about teaching a single course subject about sustainability. This has to tackle every single aspect of the fashion pipeline. So hopefully we'll do this again. And
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Just in the name of Centro, I wanted to thank you both for being with us. It was an extraordinary conversation. We learned so much. Thank you as well for the recommendations. I'm just going to switch gears to Spanish just to give a final announcement. But thank you, James, and thank you, Mónica. Todos los que nos acompañan, por favor, síganos en nuestras redes sociales. Vamos a hacer un follow-up de esta conversación con resúmenes, con las recomendaciones y todo lo que se mencionó. Entonces, si no se registraron en Eventbrite, por favor, déjenos su información en cualquiera de las plataformas, en el chat, y nosotros los incluimos para que les llegue toda la información. También de nuestra agenda, los invitamos el día de mañana. Tendremos una conversación sobre joyería con las fundadoras de Andranin, igual a la misma hora, a las 12. Y sobre todo también los queremos invitar en una semana, el jueves 18 de junio, vamos a tener unos invitados importantes en VOR OnLive. Va a ser Billy Robsar, que es fundador de Lemon Studios. También va a estar Alejandro Lozano, que es showrunner de la nueva serie de Netflix Control Z, y también va a estar Francisco Ramos, el vicepresidente de contenidos originales de Latinoamérica para Netflix, hablando sobre lo que significa ser un showrunner en la época presente. Entonces, por favor, los invitamos, y además, para seguir la conversación de tecnología, sustentabilidad, moda y todo lo que hemos platicado, por favor, contáctenos y chequen nuestros programas, tanto la licenciatura en Diseño, Textil y Moda, como nuestra maestría en Global Fashion Management y las especialidades en joyería, calzado, estilismo en moda y mercadotecnia. Dejaremos la información después de que acabemos esta plática, pero por favor contáctenos y síganos en nuestras redes sociales. Thank you a lot. Muchas gracias a los dos y nos vemos en el próximo VOR OnLive.
Yo voy a agregar algo.
Claro.
Aprovechando que estamos en los anuncios, la próxima semana vamos a tener también una conversación respecto a cómo crear una empresa de moda desde cero con dos personas a quienes les tenemos mucho cariño desde CENTRO, una de las cofundadoras de Ben & Frank y el fundador de Viceversa, así que no se olviden de checar la agenda para mayores detalles sobre todo lo que estamos haciendo en estos días. Thank you so much, James. This was fantastic.
I'm glad I was able to do
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Gracias.
Gracias a todos por escucharnos.